So good morning, everybody. I hope you can all hear me, can hear us in the room. Very welcome, and also all the people online, welcome to you. I'm looking forward to a great session on European HTA assessment, and we call this one the midterms, referring, of course, to the famous US terms, which represents the mid of an election period. And as we all know, the second half of those periods are usually very decisive, and that's what we also expect here. We are in the midterms of the preparation phase of this EU legislation, and are looking on what has already been achieved and what is still to be done within the next 2 years until 25, when this one in the end comes into force, and we will have the first HTA assessments. Let me quickly give you some background on the European Access Academy. You all know it. It's a multi-stakeholder initiative to facilitate and support the development of a joint European value framework for the assessment of innovative health technologies. We aim to identify key challenges and provide sound input for the implementation. In the end, I always say most of us in the room are Europeans. Our job is to get this now implemented in the most successful way. This legislation is what it is. Andre is one of the key people at the DG Santé driving this one. Always said that was a maximum that we were able to get. Now we have it, and now it's up to all of us to make this a success, because that's the opportunity at the desk. And this will be a tough job, as we know. This will not be a smooth process. That's very challenging decisions and value processes, scientific processes at stake. But that's it. And we aim to encourage a multi-stakeholder dialogue, that it's not just ending up being a technical interaction between, let's say, experts from the HTA bodies on the one side and highly profiled experts from the industry on the other side. No, as in the end, it's about patient care, it's about medicines, it's about health. I think a broad dialogue is what we are aiming for. We always aim to support the convention with a pre-convention questionnaire. We want to work on a scientific base, and with this one we always try to set some kind of a baseline, leveraging this pre-convention questionnaire as we did this time. You can see it on our website, www.euaac.org, and there's this research survey. It's still open until noon today, so for all people online, you are most welcome while you are listening to still fill it. Then you will be heard, and your input will be part of the next publication of this one. As a European Access Academy, we try to leverage the academic dialogue and support the academic dialogue on this one. But we also have an advantage. We are looking into these wonderful European universities one time each. And we started out at Copenhagen University, with Marlene being our co-host in Copenhagen. Then we moved for the next one to Brussels, to Vlerick University, Vlerick Business School, with Walter van Dijk being our co-host. And this time we have the pleasure to be in Utrecht University with Wim, whom I'm going to introduce in a second, being the co-host and being so nice, welcoming us yesterday evening for those physically attending in this old university building in the town hall downtown Utrecht, and then today in the Science Center. And for the fall convention, I just say stay tuned, and you will hear more at the end of this day today. Now, just an update on the publication. As you know, we have this working format at the European Access Academy, and always try to publish the results that we are having later on in scientific journals. You know the first two publications, and for those that don't have it, you can find it on our website. And also for those attending here, there are some copies at the desk outside on, let's say, the outcomes of the Copenhagen Convention. And now the paper 3 and 4 are submitted, reflecting the outcomes of the Fleric Business School convention, the one with Lauren van Hazendijk and the other with Thomas Desmet. Perhaps Lauren and Thomas quickly stand up that we all see you, because part of, let's clap. Because part of what we aim to do is also to encourage, of course, the young researcher to get into those exciting topics, because this will be part of their future. And having said this one, I'm also introducing Francine and Rian for this one. Also quickly stand up, because you will be the co-authors of this paper, so also a warm welcome. Good. With this one, Wim, it's a pleasure introducing you. You are now heading the HTA professorship at Utrecht University, and were involved from beginning on in the UNETA 21 exercise. So thanks for hosting us here, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Joerg. Firstly, I would like to thank you for actually giving us the opportunity to host this excellent event. I'm very happy to see you all. I see a lot of familiar faces. I think faces which were involved from the very early start of UNETA. And I think it's great to have this kind of opportunity also to link what I would call policy and science together. And I think we have an exciting day today with a lot of presentation, but all discussion. So I think most of you know me probably in my position formerly as director and chair of the board of UNETA Joint Action 3, and also involved in earlier versions of the UNETA Joint Actions 1 and 2, and being advisor of HCA of the Zorg Institute. But actually today I'm mostly here representing university, being a professor at the Utrecht University. And I think that some of you have seen this premises. I think it's important to actually indicate that this is the biggest university in the Netherlands. We have more than 35,000 students, and most of actually the activities are here at the Utrecht Science Park, but there are also still some activities into the city center. Some of the, for instance, languages, legal departments are still over there. So Utrecht University is actually divided in 7 faculties. So we have a number of different faculties, but most importantly for what we do over here, medicines and science are the ones which are mostly involved in this topic. And I work actually for the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences, which is actually under the Beta or Science faculty. And within that department we have a division for pharmacoepidemiology and clinical pharmacology. And within that department, you have a group which is mostly focused on this policy, which is a WHO Collaborating Center on Pharmaceutical Policy and Regulation, also including HCA. So for me, it was a little bit important to also look back a little bit, because as you know, I've been involved for many years, and it's still, sometimes it feels a little bit like unreal that we are now here, because I know all these things we did voluntary. And for years and years we thought, well, will there be anything more than just a voluntary collaboration? And now we're there. But I think it would be good to also learn a little bit about it and say, well, what did we actually experience? And where did we get from really science into policy? And where did we actually develop something which was useful on a national level? So I think maybe some of you, which were early involved, remember this. This is called the onion of the core model. When we were discussing early 2007 or 2008, what could we really do to share information? What kind of form? This was a very theoretical concept, saying, well, we have this onion, we have these different layers on information, and actually you can use these layers of information to share information, because that collaboration was really about sharing information, not about reports, not about assessments. And this led to this what we call the core HCA structure, which gives a kind of idea that you have different, what we would call blocks of data, of information, which can then subsequently put into reports or into voluntary kind of documents. But it was very, very conceptual. And although we generated some of these UNETA core model reports, some would know that these were very extensive reports. I think there were 600 or 700 pages with a lot of information, but probably not that easy to be used if you're going to do a quick assessment of, for instance, a pharmaceutical. And then finally, I think it was actually instrumentalized into this HCA core model, where also at some moment there was this division between on one hand, the clinical elements, the 4 domains which were really focused on what we would now call firstly rapid relative effectiveness assessment, and now the joint clinical assessments, and the other domains which we say, well, are also very interesting information, but probably more relevant for the national context, more relevant for the national appraisal. But at some moment we were thinking, and I think it was around Joint Action 1, well, what are we actually going to do to support, for instance, making reports on a national level? How does this model actually fit to the actual practice in the national member states? And I think this is a kind of first experiment where we actually try to do for one particular compound to say, can we actually use this core model to do an assessment? And I think this was also a submission-based assessment for pazopanib. And we felt that we actually had a nice report, but it was still very extensive. I think it was around 400 pages. And if you just will remember and go back to your own reports, for instance, for the HCA organizations, they are much smaller. But we felt, well, this is the beginning. But there was still a very large gap between what was this core model and what we would actually need on a national level to do this. And I would just like to share with you a few publications, because it also shows, I think, the importance of linking science to policy. So what we did say, well, does this actually fit? So what we did a kind of study. Well, what is in this joint assessment of pazopanib? Does it actually suit the national assessments? And we found that all the elements were in there. So what we originally did was already sufficient, but maybe still a little bit extensive for what we really needed on the national level. But this was, I think, a good start, and then also led to a first kind of publications which showed that there was more interest at the national level. And I think some of the authors are also in the room over here, said, well, this might be a start, but what will we really need to go from this core model to something which really matters on a national level? And I think that has been actually used to go to next levels. And we also felt that it was very important to not work in a silo, but just find this kind of interaction, for instance, with the regulators. And we all know that the EPAR is a very important document if we do the assessments on a national level, but also the joint level. I remember in 2010, I was sitting in a room, I think with Michael, and we was just staring at each other. Should we collaborate or should we not? And at some moment we did, and I think this was one of the first results, which was very important for actually bringing this collaboration further. Because we thought, well, we really need to make use as efficiently as possible on what comes from EMA. But also other stakeholders. I think that also industry was thinking what to do with this UNETA core model. Therefore, I'm very happy that Marleen and Ansgar and even Joerg are in the room. But this was a very nice example where industry said, well, what are we going to do with the UNETA core model? Is this something would actually help us to organize our information? And if we do so, would it actually automatically fit in the submission files which we are going to use in the long term, for instance, for the joint assessments? So I think that for numbers of years we have experimented, first in the joint action 2, and I think the reports became more relevant, smaller, more directive, and in joint action 3, even more of those joint assessments, showing that we're actually capable to produce those reports quickly, timely, and efficiently. And I think that was also, I think, the basis for the EU regulation, that we are able to show that we could do it, that the methods were there, the collaboration were there, the stakeholders were there. So the next step, I think, was the EU HCR. I think a very logical step. And I think that is, then this is overview, and I think Anne is also in the room, which did a lot of work to get a little bit overview on where we are. What did we do with all these reports? Is this really sufficiently? What will be the next steps? So from that part and where we are now, I think it's very good to be here and just use this platform to see what is now needed to come from this voluntary collaboration, because we know that after Joint Action 3, we did not produce any new joint assessments. So I think there is a gap, and we need to work to new joint reports which are usable. And I think this paper, I think, is very important because already it shows what we need also in research to actually help implementing these joint reports in a national setting. And there are many questions, because I know in my organization, in ZIN, we are thinking, well, what do we need to adapt to do our clinical assessments? But also, for instance, in the Netherlands, we do cost effectiveness assessments. So what does it mean if you have a joint clinical assessment? How are you going to organize your own national cost effectiveness assessment? So many questions, and we need science to actually help us to deal with that. And therefore, I think these kind of meetings and this kind of discussion is very instrumental to actually bring this forward. So I hope that that is a start for the program today. If there are any more questions later today, I think there are many people which even have much more up-to-date information on where we are than I. And I'm also very looking forward to the first presentation of today of Maya Matthews. And just to say a few words on the pre-convention questionnaire. And I think already Joerg said a few words on that we had this pre-convention questionnaire on the midterms. I think it already showed that there was a broad participation. So currently we have 52 completed questionnaires, and more than, so 13 countries actually put their input in those questionnaires, and we have at least 5 respondents per stakeholder group. And it's also important to show that these are not just people, but people with a lot of formal knowledge of how this project, how this process actually continues. So people which were involved in drafting the guidance of documents to the UNETA 21 deliverables, or where they actually observing the setting up of the HCA coordination group, or the establishment of the stakeholder network. So people which are very closely linked to those activities. And if you look to their, what we would say, remaining challenges, I think there is a lot of questions about the readiness at the member state level to really implement those reports at the national level. What is the capacity at the member state level to actually be actively involved in the joint clinical assessment and the joint scientific consultations? But also, how applicable and usable is the current methodological framework, and how does the PICO scheme actually work? I think that within UNETA 21, a lot of work has been done to actually find out how you're going to organize the whole systematic with the PICO. And I think that is also something we need to share and to discuss with all the stakeholders. And then also the feasibility and the timelines in relation to the requirements of the legislation. So this shows challenges I think we should address today, and I think will be addressed today also in the subgroups. So the agenda, just very quickly. So we have the opening, and I think quite soon we will go to the opening speech of Maya Matthews, and then there will be options for the honor panelists to actually have a few questions. Then we have the presentations after those questions, and then there will be time for coffee break and a panel discussions with the panelists for 1 hour. And then we have the lunch break. And just a few remarks for housekeeping. Everything of this will be recorded and will be publicly made available. And we ask all presenters to just stick to 10 minutes of presentations, because we're already a little bit over time. And questions, both on the video and the web stream page, and we will try to address it. We will look at then what it can actually be brought to the panelists today.